History is written by the victors. It's a well-known phrase, a warning that the stories we inherit are often shaped by bias, hatred, and the agendas of those left standing. But what if the most horrific story ever told about a fallen empire was true? We are taught about the glory of Rome, an empire of law, order, and civilization that conquered the known world. But every hero needs a villain, and for Rome, that villain was a formidable maritime empire located across the sea, a civilization of merchants and explorers who challenged Rome's dominance at every turn. They were the people of Carthage. Roman historians painted a picture of their rivals as cruel, greedy, and untrustworthy. But they saved their darkest ink for one particular accusation, an accusation so monstrous it has echoed through millennia. They claimed that in times of crisis, the citizens of Carthage would commit the ultimate horror. They would sacrifice their own children to appease their gods. For centuries, this was dismissed as vicious wartime propaganda, a lie told by Rome to justify the complete annihilation of its greatest enemy. But then, archaeologists began to dig in the ruins of the forgotten city, and what they found threatens to turn a vicious lie into a horrifying truth. Join us as we investigate one of history's coldest cases. Is this the story of a monstrous empire that murdered its young, or the tale of the most successful character assassination in human history? To understand the accusation, we must first understand the rivalry. Rome and Carthage were the two superpowers of the ancient Mediterranean, locked in a century-long struggle for survival known as the Punic Wars. This wasn't just a war of soldiers. It was a war of cultures, a clash of civilizations. For Rome, Carthage was the ultimate other, and Roman writers like Diodorus Siculus and Plutarch left behind chillingly specific accounts of their enemy's darkest ritual. There was in their city a bronze image of Cronus, extending its hands, palms up and sloping toward the ground, so that each of the children, when placed thereon, rolled down and fell into a sort of gaping pit filled with fire. They describe a massive bronze statue of the god Baal Hammon, whom the Greeks associated with their titan, Cronus. The statue's arms were outstretched and sloped downwards. The wealthiest families, in moments of great peril like war or famine, would allegedly offer their firstborn sons. The child would be placed in the statue's hands and would roll down into a pit of fire below. To drown out the sounds, the area would be filled with the deafening noise of flutes and drums, so that the ritual would be perceived as an act of sacred offering, not of grief. For centuries, this story was the ultimate justification for Rome's actions. After the Third Punic War, Rome didn't just defeat Carthage, they obliterated it. They allegedly sowed the fields with salt so nothing would ever grow again. They destroyed a people, their culture, their history, and with no Carthaginian voices left to defend themselves, the Roman version of the story became the only version. It was a perfect crime, sealed by history, or so it seemed. In 1921, French archaeologists digging in Tunis, the modern city that stands on the ruins of Carthage, made a startling discovery. They unearthed a sacred precinct, a kind of cemetery, filled with thousands of small urns buried under stone markers called stelae. They named this place the Tophet. When they opened the urns, they found the cremated remains of children, not just a few, but thousands upon thousands, buried over centuries. The ages of the children ranged mostly from newborns to about 4 years old. Alongside them, they sometimes found the remains of lambs or kids, as if they were interred in the same sacred manner. This seemed to be the smoking gun, the physical proof that validated the darkest claims of the Romans. The story was no longer just words on a scroll. It was written in bone and ash. Scientific analysis of the bones only deepened the mystery. Studies, like one led by Patricia Smith, concluded that the children buried here were healthy. They didn't show signs of disease that would suggest this was a normal cemetery for infants who died of natural causes in an era of high infant mortality. The stelae, the stone markers, also offered clues. Many were inscribed with messages of dedication to the gods, Baal, Hammon, and Tenet. They read like receipts for a fulfilled vow. The case seemed closed. Carthage was guilty, but in history, nothing is ever that simple. In recent decades, a growing number of scholars have begun to challenge this grim verdict. They argue that we are still seeing Carthage through Roman eyes, and they propose a different, far more tragic interpretation of the Tophet. What if the Tophet wasn't a site of ritual sacrifice, but a sacred burial ground for the most beloved and mourned members of society? These scholars argue that in a pre-modern world, the death of a baby or a young child was an agonizingly common event. Miscarriages, stillbirths, and diseases could devastate a family. Perhaps these children, who died before they could truly live, were considered special, sacred. They were offered to the protection of the gods in a special cemetery, a place where they would be eternally cared for. This explains why the remains are almost exclusively of the very young. In this view, the inscriptions on the stelae aren't receipts for a sacrifice, but loving dedications. The animal remains found alongside the children could have been substitute offerings, a practice seen in many religions, including in the Old Testament. And what about the Roman writers? The proponents of this theory point out a crucial detail. The most graphic accounts were written hundreds of years after Carthage was destroyed. They were writing history based on hearsay, legend, and old propaganda. It's like writing a detailed account of World War II based on stories you heard from your great-great-grandfather. Details get twisted. Agendas get inserted. The final argument is a human one. Is it truly plausible that an entire civilization for centuries systematically murdered its own children? Not just a fringe cult, but the mainstream society? For many, this is a psychological step too far. So, we are left with two competing narratives, born from the same silent ashes. On one hand, the ancient texts and a cemetery filled with the bones of the young paint a picture of a society capable of unspeakable religious fanaticism, a truth so dark it's almost impossible to accept. On the other hand, a re-examination of the evidence suggests a story of profound grief and love, twisted by their enemies into a weapon of propaganda to justify genocide, a lie so effective it has stained a civilization's name forever. The debate among historians and archaeologists rages on. New evidence could surface tomorrow that swings the pendulum definitively to one side. But for now, the children of the Tophet remain silent. What do you believe? Were the people of Carthage victims of the most brutal slander in history, or were they perpetrators of an unimaginable crime? The final verdict, perhaps, is now up to you.